Well, let's begin with our story. Our story that is part of this program today. Romance can become in any era, at any time, in any place. It doesn't matter in what decade, romance is always there. So when, and I've explained in my little story on the website that the Duchess of Richmond held this fantastic ball, and she was living in Brussels. They were very wealthy family, extremely wealthy. She moved to Brussels, lock, stock, and barrel. She had 14 children. Sarah was in the middle. She was the seventh daughter. So the 7 daughters, 7 sons. She is in the middle. She's 19 years old when her mother put this ball together. There were soldiers in gallant uniforms, bright red uniforms, gallantly, sparkly dancing with all the young ladies in the ballroom. But Sarah seemed to spy this other gentleman, he was a quiet gentleman, off in the corner. Now he's had battles, he's fought with Wellington, he's had field work, and he's now a major general. So he's climbed from a very low rank when he started into the military at 15 years old, and he worked his way up. Some of the men would actually buy the commission. They wouldn't go through the ranks, rank and file. The house is still open for tours. And so he worked his way up and worked and got his medals that way. So there he is, gallantly dressed, and this young 19-year-old girl spies him. It's absolutely enthralled and just taken with it, smitten with it. She's 19. He's almost 40. Now, he's been married before. His wife had died. It's sad. They were in their 20s, and they had one child. He was only married to her for like 3 years when she passed away, and he had not married for 10 years. So he had a young son of 10. Now, Harrigan Maitland is just an officer with rank and file. He has honors, he's got recognition. Everybody, really agrees with him everywhere, and he's very polite, but he's not royalty. He's not in the same class as Lady Sarah. So for her to be attracted to this soldier was a no-no, an absolute no-no. So it didn't matter. Apparently she was a very pretty girl. Her mother was very attractive. There's portraits of her mother. And according to Paul, there is not one portrait of Lady Sarah. Not one anywhere. But the description of her sounds like she was a very pretty young lady, refined, very ladylike, very fashionable. We'll get into that a little later. Now this romance is going to start at that ball. And she's dancing with him, and she's smitten with him, and she's going to see him no matter what her father tells her. So in 1815, when this big ball occurs, not knowing that it is going to be the biggest battle ever, Battle of Waterloo. And Waterloo is just south of Brussels. It's in a little village. Napoleon's army is on one side, this massive blue line, and you've got the British, the Netherlands, you've got the Prussians and the Russians all heading on to the French field, and they weren't going to hold because Napoleon's army is massive. But something happens will change that, and by accident actually, they come across the no man's land, and Napoleon's army didn't know what they were doing, and they broke rank. And they ran, and the British just went over them. They just conquered it. So that's the Battle of Waterloo in a nutshell. So he is under Wellington. Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington. Look at our street named after Wellesley Street. Another little history that was going to pop in every so often in our story. And he is really friends with Wellington. Wellington is another gentleman who has marital problems. He married a young lady. It almost reminds me, and who's from Jane Austen Society? A couple of people, okay. You know the movie Persuasion, where young Anne Elliot has been pining over her sober boyfriend for a long time. And she waits and waits and waits, and she's getting now sort of older. I guess she's probably close to 30. When he comes back finally and retires, no matter what, she wants him. Well, this is what happened to Wellington. His wife, when they were young, you know, promises are made, but you never know. In the military, you could be killed. But she waited for him till he came back. Now he's promised to marry her, so he did. But it wasn't really love that next time around. They did have 2 children, 2 boys, but their marriage just split. So Wellington is really a man's man. He sticks with his army all the time. So Wellington gets to know Harrigan Maitland pretty good and likes him. So they end up in Paris. And where else would you go? Have a nice weekend in Paris. So who comes there, follows him? Sarah. And she goes to Harrigan Maitland's place where he's living. Wow, this is a no-no too. So he leaves. Actually, it's recorded that he left his place of abode because it was not polite for a single lady to be with a gentleman who was not married. So he left, and she was left in his house. This is in the summer, so in October they were married. Now this is 3 years later, in 1818. They come here. Now she's 21 years old. Now her father's now agreed, okay, fine. I agreed upon it, but since I just become Governor General, this is her father, of course, Duke of Richmond, he can now make Harrigan Maitland Lieutenant Governor. That's how they are appointed, even today. Governor General appoints Lieutenant Governor. So he becomes a Lieutenant Governor, the 4th one here, and he comes to York with a fine lady of breeding. She is the Duke's daughter coming to York. It is incredibly backwoods. It doesn't have any fine shops here. It has a church, it has schools, but they're very rural, extremely rural. And they're known as Mighty York. The main street is King Street. The front street is, of course, the harbor. And where are they going to live? Well, in 1805, a gentleman came here. He was also a lieutenant governor, was John Emsley. And he had built 2 big houses, one on King, and one, his big country house, was up on Bay Street, just near Grosvenor, and it was called the Emsley Villa. And his house down on King was called the Emsley House. This was his townhouse, that was his country house. John Emsley died in 1805, and his wife remained in the house until she moved up to the country house, and then it was empty for a while, till 1812. Of course, we had the Battle of York. The Americans burnt the house. It was in pretty bad damage because they're right in the flow of their traffic as they came through York. So in 1815, the government here bought it. It now kind of fixed up, and now becomes the regal house or the government house. And this is where all the affluent political men come, and of course, the lieutenant governor. If you can picture where Roy Thompson Hall is today, that is where the house was. It's faced King, the back was front, and he could see the harbor from his back window. This gardens all around, and this is where Lady Sarah comes with her, and they lived there off and on for 10 years. Now, in amongst the folks coming here, there are some affluent families, are also hired to come here to be political leaders. One of them was John Henry Dunn, who becomes the Receiver General. And as people are paying taxes today, who do you pay your taxes to? The Receiver General. He receives all the monies in town, so it is a lifetime job. So John Henry Dunn and his wife Charlotte come here. She is 19 years old, and he is 28. Again, 10 years difference, maybe almost 10 years. And they live not far from here, Spadina in front. That's where their house was. And their house still sat there until the 1860s. Who do you associate with? You associate with the Perry Maitlands, the Jarvis family, the Boltons, which were up the street at the Grange House, and the Campbells who lived there as well. But shopping, where do you shop? There's no fine shops or shoe shops or fabric stores or even just baker stores anywhere here. So where does Lady Sarah get all her ideas from? Where is she going to shop? She orders fabric from Paris, comes to Boston, and it's shipped over here so she can have the fine gowns to wear at all the parties. So all these ladies in town who are affluent families they are enamored by her looks. So she's mentoring all these women to dress like her. There's not a lot of them, but there's a few of them. The other one was Harriet Wells, her husband was Joseph Wells. All of these men were military men. It's just funny that everybody who held a political position were all military men. We retired and got a government job. And another gentleman came here. His name was John Walpole Willis, and his wife Mary, Lady Mary. Now, Lady Mary Willis was on the opposite end of the string. Her father was an Earl of Strathmore. The 11th Earl of Strathmore. Now, she thought she had a better position than Lady Sarah, and it is even noted in historical writings and books and diaries by two gentlemen, the Jarvis family, Samuel Peter Jarvis and William W. Powell, who was Chief Justice of Fort Campbell. They're writing to each other. Samuel Peter lives that way. There's just on the outside of Yonge Street, just north of Queen, and William W. Powell lives here. And they're writing letters to each other. No, and it was too far to walk. This was all woods. This was all totally wooded lane. There was no streets like this at all. You would get lost out here. Once you passed Yonge Street, you would get lost. So they would write letters back and forth to each other. So Samuel Peter wrote to Mr. Powell saying, there's been an incident in town with two titled ladies. They are not, Lady Mary, who's not, is getting kind of miffed about the fact that she's not invited to Lady Sarah's soirees and parties. And she hasn't been invited to any of these parties by Lady Sarah. And she feels she's been snubbed. Now, is an earl more than a duke? I'm not sure. But Lady Mary felt that she should have been introduced to Lady Sarah. Lady Sarah should have gone to where she lived. The problem was, Lady Mary was living in a hotel by the Market Square. And if you know where St. Lawrence Hall is, on King, if you take away that building, that's Market Square. The market, the very first open market was right there. It sold pigs, sheep. The odor must have been erroneous in this park, where this market was. And opposite was Frank's Hotel. And this is where Lady Mary and her husband, John Walpole, and his mother and sister were living, because their house wasn't finished yet. And she wanted Lady Sarah to come there. So in this letter it said, all has been rectified. They are now, Lady Mary has now been goes to parties at Lady Sarah's house, and now everything's fine. But Lady Mary is still kind of, it almost sounds like she's a social coordinator. Like she wanted better because she was the daughter of an earl. Her marriage wasn't good either. She separated from her husband, and then he divorced her, and then sadly though, Lady Mary died in 1834 in England. But these are the families that were centered around the social life. Now going back to Lady Mary, this is an out story from this. Her maiden name was Bowes Lyon. Bowes Lyon, yes. She is related to the Queen Mother. Queen Mother Elizabeth was Bowes Lyon. Her father was Claude. He was the 13th Earl of Strathmore. So he's from the same line as her brother. Her brother was George. So George had a son who didn't have any children, and it went to Claude, who was Queen Elizabeth's father. So she is related in a way to the Bowes line. So these were very affluent people, but she didn't have much of a diary when she came to married John Willis. But she does thought she was better than anybody. I've got Lady Mary, Lady Sarah, you've got Harriet Wells, and then you've got John Henry Dunn with his wife, Charlotte. Now, going off a bit, John Henry Dunn, they had 8 children at that house, and one of them was Alexander Roberts Dunn. Any recollection of who that is? Alexander Roberts Dunn. Okay. He went to Upper Canada College, and Upper Canada College on King Street, where the Princess of Wales, the Royal Alexander Theatre sits today between Simcoe and John. It was sitting right on King, and Alexander Roberts Dunn went there in 1833. His mother died in 1834. So, but he became a military man again, but he bought his commission. So he jumped from private right to lieutenant right away. But he was tall, 6'3", slender, and he was in the cavalry. But his claim to fame that he fought at the Battle of Balaclava, in charge of the Light Brigade. Cannons to the left of them, cannons to the right of them, wrote 600, written by Lord Tennyson, the poem. But his claim to fame, he was the first Canadian who won the Victoria Cross. His medals are at Upper Canada College today, all his medals. Now, he was a military man from day one. He did have some romances in his life, and but his parents lived here. Again, associating with the Peregrine Maitlands, the Platers, the Jarvises. Now, going back to Maitland and Sarah, it's noted that he was a quiet man, very reserved, very kind of a sad face, very, very solemn face. Rock beaches never, himself was never. Always in military, what they call military undress. He wasn't dressed like all buttoned up. He would be a little unrelaxed. So he was in his undress, but he was always in military dress. Sarah was always by his side, always. Now, they had 7 children. They lived in York from 1818 to 1828. But in that period of time, they transferred back and forth. One of the things that Maitland liked to have happen was the streetscape of York. It was pretty bad, pretty sad. So up the corner of our house here on the left-hand side is the cornerstone of the first courthouse that we had commissioned. And it was right opposite St. James Church, which was the courthouse, and opposite was the new jail, brick jail. But these were commissioned by him. The other one he did was public schools, and the first general hospital was made put down. Lady Sarah was also involved in a lot of things. She was a patronage of the girls' school. Now, once you reached a certain age, at 12, 13, 14, the boys and girls were separated. So they weren't in the same class. So the boys were learning military, geography, political history. The girls were learning English, spelling, writing, literature, and religious studies in the morning. In the afternoon, they were learning needlework, how to sew, how to do crocheting and knitting. That was the girls, the whole thing that they did. But she also helped women that were not so lucky, but working class in the town. Women whose husband had died and the children didn't have much money. She was a patronage of them. There was an actual society that she was governing over. So her life here was, they almost said that she was here for 10 years, but they said she almost as if she belonged here. She was part of the scenery. You see her everywhere. And Dr. Henry Scadding, who was the minister of the Holy Trinity by the Eaton Center, he writes of her as being refined, ladylike, very welcoming, always in a word for everybody, and beautifully dressed and attired. And as I mentioned back, how did she dress this way? She wasn't dressing this way. This is a cotton dress, which was expensive, but silk is an incredible product made from a moth. A butterfly, I see little children over there, and there's a butterfly makes a cocoon, and then they come out, and there's a caterpillar, and then they come out, and they're a beautiful butterfly. Well, a moth makes what's around his cocoon, which is the silk. A piece this long to 39 inches, that's all they make per cocoon. You need thousands of these to make a pound of fabric, and it's silk. The weaving process of making silk is incredible. Now, we have two young ladies here, and both in silk dresses. The texture of them are quite different from each other. Sarah is wearing moire, which is water silk. It's the way it's woven. It is woven instead of straight up and down, it's on an angle, so you get this sort of weaving effect up and down. That's a watermark, moire. Veronica is wearing what we call raw silk. It hasn't been processed, and it is also silk as well. I have several samples on the table. Silk can be made into different types of fabric. Taffeta. You know what shot is? Shot silk. It's done with two colors going in and out of each other, and they actually look like they're iridescent. This is shot. So it looks like there's a blue and a red. So it looks like it's iridescent. One way is dark, one way is light. This is shot. And these fabrics were so expensive, incredibly expensive. Taffeta was another one. You had velvet. The incredible expense to make a dress. You need at least 7 meters or 7 yards to make a dress. I'm talking now. This is more of the Empire line, which would be in the teens when Sarah arrived. But by the time she left, she was dressing this one. And this is 1825. This is called the morning dress. You had a morning dress, an afternoon dress, a tea dress, a supper dress, a dinner dress, and a ball dress. And this is for everything you did. So whatever you're going to do, you had to change. So in the morning, you would dress this way. She'd be going out to her garden, or writing letters, or having sort of doing needlework in it. She would be a parasol, and she's got a bonnet, which is not quite cutting all her face, which was part of the lady's look, that she had, her face should be shielded. The style of this dress is based on an actual dress. I must say that the gown you see here, the gowns hanging up, mine, have all been supplied by Fashion History Productions, which Sarah Walker and myself are the owners of. So the dresses here is in this book. These are prints done in 1809 and 1829 by Mr. Ackerman, Rudolph Ackerman, and he was a printer. And you would bring your prints into the shop and have them printed, and you would make a book, or booklet, or pamphlet. He had 450 prints done. So this book was put out in the 1990s, and some of them are in color, and some of them are in black and white. Unfortunately, the picture of this one is in black and white. But underneath every picture would be the description of what the color was, how it looked, what it was supposed to go with, accessories she's supposed to have. The reason Sarah made it out of blue, because the color they wanted out of is apple green and myrtle. Now myrtle is like a blue-green, so the dress would have been like this, moire, apple green, you can picture that, and myrtle collar, it's the Van Dyke collar. All of these pieces of satin edging are done by hand. Little cambric collar as well. Sarah made the parasol as well, and the hat. And what's underneath as well. So she followed the picture, she made her own pattern, and she made the dress.
Can you see these over on this side? On this one. She made these.
Yeah, she did this one.
Is this over publication?
Yes, it is. And the dress that I'm hanging up the wall there, I took that, and I didn't do exactly that. Oh, sorry, I don't have it on me. But I took it, and and I took the Elizabethan collar at the top, and I put Elizabethan around the cuff. And this is an outdoor dress called a carriage dress or a promenade dress. It's darker, it will pick up dirt from the carriage and also from the floor, from the ground. The blue one, you're not leaving the house. You're not going anywhere. You're just walking around the home, you're writing letters, you're sitting, you're having tea with somebody, you're never leaving the house. So this is your morning dress. That is your carriage dress, your promenade dress. So then there's a tea dress, then there's an afternoon dress. I mean, you're dressing all the time. And of course, this is earlier. So this is like 1815, that is 1820. This is 10 years difference. So this type of era is very short. It's a very short period of time when these types of dresses were designed. Do you want to walk around?
Excuse me, is that the actual dress?
No, she made it, reproduction.
Okay.
The little one's in here. But she felt she didn't want to make it apple green with a myrtle collar. It's quite broad, quite bold, and yellow shoes. The hat is exactly what's in the picture. Do you want to walk around and let them see? The bottom of the dress is wadded. It's called a wadded hem. It's weighted, it's heavy. So hat is inside.
Wow, look at their dress. On the bottom, it's got like a puff.
You want to walk over to this way? That's very simply done. It's an antique dress. The shawl is a Persian shawl, hand-embroidered.
Apple myrtle?
I'm gonna get in and we'll take a picture. Ready?
So why did she not go up green?
Okay, everybody look over here. Sarah. Oh, hang on. Okay, ready? No, Jason, you're not in there. 1, 2, 3. Ah, yeah, you moved too soon. That's all we need.
This is a surprise.
Put your boots on, Marta.
Sarah and I do the fashion, we do reproductions as this dress says, and we do try to be faithful. Like we have little Spencers on the corner there. Unfortunately, we didn't have a model wearing of these, but anyway, they are very military effective because that's what was around then. And they are based on actual style that Sarah has seen in books to the detail. But this here, this actually is an actual 1812 shawl. It is silk, hand embroidered with matadized embroidery. It is, it's not very wide. There were shawls, stoles, and wraps. So this is a shawl, it has no purpose whatsoever. It doesn't do any warmth, it just looks nice. And Napoleon's wife Josephine had hundreds of these, hundreds and hundreds of these. The field and table, which are pashminas, which are made of goat hair and silk. But this is actual silk. Where did you get this? Sarah.
They didn't know
For looks.
The value.
the guy or the storyline with it. And it looked like this affirming shawl because the dye is not good. It's made in the period when the jacquard shawl loom had just been introduced. So the shawl had not been developed into a very high-tech situation that later definitely showed. So if you see the dyes on her, vegetable dyes, and there's variations between some of the yarns. You can see where the production of a batch of vegetable dyes is impossible to exactly match the way you can with chemical dyes. So it shows many aspects of the history of weaving and the history of dyeing and spinning, all into one garment, which to me is its value because of what it tells you about the history of technology and the history of fashion.
So I'm going to invite my president here, Paul, to talk about the military because of Maitland's military history.
Thank you. This is quite an interesting story. As Diane mentioned, he was a career military man who rose up through the ranks, so that's something to be sniffed at by the upper echelon of society. How dare he earn his commission by doing virtuous deeds and daring do, and get himself ingratiated into high society. He was, we wouldn't call him lowborn, but I guess under Doug Ford's regime, he's the upper middle class. So But he did distinguish himself. He was very brave. Some said foolhardy. His claim to fame, of course, is the Battle of Waterloo. He was in charge of the 91st Highland Light Infantry, and in the late stages of the battle, as the French Old Guard marched towards their decimation, he was in charge of the group. If you've seen any of the depictions or the movies, they show the 91st lying down in the tall grass, and as the French approached, Wellington was reported to yell out, "Now Maitland, now is your chance." And he ordered all the troops to stand up and fire a massed volley at the French, and of course that broke the French line and ended the war, essentially, the battle. As Diane said, he was much older than Sarah, but he caught her eye. Sarah's father obviously wasn't too enamored of him as a suitor, because he was looking to have her marry off in at least his level, maybe a little higher up. So when Maitland and Sarah ran off to Paris, it was under the protection of the Duke of Wellington. And it was he who facilitated the reconciliation between daughter and father, and ingratiated son-in-law with the father. It turned out that they both had a mutual passion for cricket, and so they got on very well together, and that's probably what saved him from being in disgrace, and also got him his position as Lieutenant Governor here in Ontario, Upper Canada. As Diane said, they came to a very colonial town, much smaller than New York, to which muddy York was often compared, and very little in the terms of amenities. You had to homegrown your amenities. So Sarah, being able to order fabric and designs from Europe and have them sent through New York or Boston. I don't know why they didn't come from Montreal, but apparently that was the easier route. Was one thing. I don't know, because we don't have mass manufacturing, but we do have designers, the equivalent of Dolce & Gabbana and everybody in Paris. They would design the latest outfits and showcase them both on live models and on mannequins. And they would be copied in miniature and sent to the great locations like New York, and London, everywhere else, on dolls. So the dolls would be about 2 feet high. Yeah, 27 inches tall. And so you would order a fabric, and you would order the doll, and the doll would become dressed in the design. And then you took that design to your local seamstress, and she measured it to fit you. And that's how it came to be. So Sarah would have all of these wonderful outfits sent, and of course, if she's going to host a party, as is required by the wife of the Lieutenant Governor, the local ladies of any level don't want to be seen as looking like poor cousins. So they would order up stuff, probably killed their husband's credit cards, but they would order up stuff and have them made too. So it became quite a boom for Toronto, for York, to have a number of seamstresses all vying for attention and all showing that they could make the best dresses, and having all this fabric imported from Europe to York. So that was a way for society suddenly to build up. As the Lieutenant Governor, of course, he hosted a number of important balls. Always had to have one at New Year's. Not so much at Christmas. Christmas is not, at this time, not as well celebrated as New Year's would be. A King's birthday, of course, and certain other occasions would be required to have a ball of some kind. Mostly by the military, because they formed the garrison here in the town, and so their officers would have to show up and, of course, bring wives, girlfriends, not necessarily together, to these occasions in the 1 or 2 stately mansions that could support a certain number of people. There were balls held at Old Fort York in the officers' garrison mess there. You needed larger spaces. The Maitlands actually built a giant marquee on a lawn in order to have one party. So a temporary structure just to have the party. And of course, the military were the only people who had accomplished musicians, so they would provide the music. So, and of course, then the officers always had to have their dress to showcase what their wives and ladies are wearing. So I have a few items here on display. Everybody talks about the thin red line, the British line, but you see I'm dressed in blue, so that sort of destroys the whole concept. Only the British infantry wore red, but there were outfits, of course, the rifle groups all wore green, artillery all wore blue, and if we're fighting the Americans in the War of 1812, the Americans all dressed their infantry in blue, but their artillery in red, and their riflemen in green. So it gets confusing. So we have here an officer of the light infantry in this buff and red coat with the silver shoulder boards, and then an officer of adjutant rank. This is his undress garb, a sleeveless waistcoat with gold braid and buttons. The officer equivalent here hanging from the lamps is the equivalent officer to my rank, to my regiment. So where I have yellow twilling, he has gold braid. Where I have brass buttons, he has gold buttons, 55 gold buttons. Where I have a blank sabretache, his is embroidered with the Prince of Wales cipher, so that you can tell the class between the two. And then in the corner here, the red coat, that is what's called a pelisse, and you wear that off your shoulder to look very suave. It's never worn as a coat. It's merely meant to hang decoratively over one shoulder. By the time of the Crimea War, they became very elaborate, and the French, being particularly snooty, would put 4 sleeves on their coats, so that you could showcase all the Austrian knotwork and brocade work on the jacket. And some of them were actually, again, just because it was cumbersome, you had 4 floppy sleeves. They were made small, so they were just basically a large shoulder patch that hung off with 4 little floppy arms, but covered in gold and silver and lace and so on. The soldier had to spend a considerable amount of money to maintain his dress. The silver braids here, or silver chain on these light infantry epaulets, there are 60 to each board, and they are equivalent to $5 each strand. So a soldier could easily go into debt. And that's why they stayed in the army a long time, because they ended up having to earn so much to get out of
I
debt.
was just going to show you, Paul.
Yeah.
I got this at the market. This is real silver,
Yeah.
43 inches long. It's $25 just for that. And I don't know where I put that on somebody's dress, but it's real silver. That is real silver.
Yeah.
On the end.
Yeah. And the fun thing is that the gold and silver braid and chain makers still exist, and you can order from Paris and Brussels if you want to have an outfit made identical to that for Halloween. So Maitland,
Fur on the one in the corner?
yes,
What kind of fur?
it'd be a fox usually, or a wolf. The lower animals, marten, otter, beaver, it wouldn't be mink. In North America, most of them, of course, would be beaver, but small animals, badger, hare, all that kind of stuff. Anything that was soft, and usually the winter coat of the animal. The 2 hats are give you an idea. As an austerity measure, the one with the green tassel, that's called a Belgique shako. If you've seen your pictures, the soldiers wear long, tall hats, stovepipe hats. Well, they found that if you cut off the hat a little shorter and put a false front, you can save a lot of money on, and it looks just as impressive. So this was the new style hat coming in. The other is a Tarleton helmet. Lord Tarleton designed this for his cavalry, and it caught on. It's basically a dressage helmet with a bearskin roach, which is big black thing, and a white turkey feather emblem on the side. Different regiments would have different color combinations and so on. You can also see a change in the uniforms. When the war started, the coats were like you see in the Revolutionary War, long coats that were pinned back to the outside so that allowed free movement through the woods. Well, they realized, well, if we're pinning them back because they're getting in the way, why don't we just cut them off? So they did. So the light infantry jacket, again, has got the remnants of a tail, but sewn down. And then they said, why are we doing that? Let's go to just a short jacket. And so now we have the short jacket from the 1812s up, replacing the older style. Soldiers are wearing pants now. Originally that was an over thing, like putting on snow pants to go outside. You put pants on over your hose and so on. Of course, the Scottish troops all wore kilts. All of this, the style changes over time, and because it looks so fancy and so elegant, the ladies adopted that style. Hence the Spencer dresses and the short jackets, and a whole range of feminine versions of the pelisse came into being at this time. So you have all of that. The idea of the uniform, of course, is one, it has to be functional. You got to be able to fight in it, move in it. So the soldier would often make changes to the uniform simply because of practicality. The other thing is that you want it to be mass-produced and therefore cheap. So it's made of wool. The lower ranks very rough wool. The higher ranks it was called doeskin. But it's wool, and the reason it's dyed red in the British Army is because madder red is the cheapest dye you can get. The French, well, you have Prussian blue, of course, that's grinding up minerals to make the Prussian blue ink that made the blue uniforms. Each country seemed to pick its own color. The French decided to be really cheap, and their uniforms are slate gray because that's the natural color of the wolves. They didn't bother dyeing.
Decided to be really cheap.
I think, now this is totally off the wall thing, I think that all the great countries got together and they looked at a whole bunch of swatches and chips and decided, oh, we want this color and we want this color, and the small countries got what was left over. So when you're looking and researching colors and uniforms, and so you see the Duke of Piedmont, his troops were dressed in canary yellow, and one of the other troops is actually pink.
Wow.
So they must have been late that day, and it's only, that's it, yellow pink, that's all that's left. But again, as uniforms moved, and certainly by the time Sir Peregrine Maitland and Lady Sarah left Toronto, the whole uniform changed again with the advent of the Crimean War, where British and were adopting Polish and Russian and Hussar looks and so on. There wasn't an English regiment of cavalry that looked anything like England, and the French were changing all their designs as well to what became known as the kepi, the short hat that you see the United States Civil War soldiers wearing. Those are a direct steal from the French design, and so on. When you see soldiers, I'm sure you've seen parades through town, and the soldiers in Scottish dress, and you'll notice that all the drummers are wearing leopard skins or lion skins or things like that. That's because when Napoleon was fighting in Egypt in 1809 and they beat the Egyptians, they took those animal skins as trophies and wore them on their uniform. And then when the British beat up Napoleon, they took them and put them on their uniform. So you always wear a piece of somebody else, and so on. So we have hats that change color, designs that change color, uniforms that change color because you're adopting a trophy from some other country. But also you want to have a certain psychological look. Somebody dressed in a uniform like this has a certain presence. You can't slouch because you're cinched in, and you can't, this is what's called a stock. It's made of leather, it's 1/8 of an inch thick. You can't slouch. So the men look taller, more regal, more elegant. You want them to look more impressive because that shows your enemy that if the state can afford to dress their soldiers in such wonderful outfits, then they must be a powerful state indeed, and maybe we should attack them. So you get uniforms that become almost Dr. Seuss in their design, because we're trying to outdo the enemy by being more and more impressive in psychological warfare in the way you dress. So naturally, when the soldiers are here and the young ladies are walking the town, trying not to step into cow poo and the mud of King Street, and they see the soldiers coming into town, and they always had to dress in the number 1 dress to come into town, so as not to spoil the image, even if they were coming to get drunk at the local tavern. You know, how can you not be impressed and decide that maybe you should marry a young soldier rather than the guy sweeping out the barn or chasing a pig down the street? So I'm sure many a young lady landed with somebody quite elegantly, and then as would strip the uniform as soon as she could of all the golden buttons and sell them on the market. But it's an interesting time for Sarah and Maitland here. And they set a particular level in society that everybody tried to emulate, and we can't, you know, whether it was their intent or not, they boosted the economy of York considerably during their 10 years here, just because they wanted to have good stuff as befits their station, and then everybody followed suit. So we ended up with lots of interesting things developing and following the 10-year period that he was Lieutenant Governor, just because of his presence.
Thank you.
Any questions? Talk some more about stuff, but.
When you say that the outfits should, you know, say something about who they are as an army, and then you said that they had to pay for their own uniforms.
Yes.
So if they wanted to like upgrade their uniform, is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, we're talking about a very classed society at this
Yeah.
time. So the soldier was issued, the regular guy drafted off the street, pulled out of the bar and shoved it in the army, whatever. They were issued 1 uniform a year.
Okay.
One size fits all. So
Oh, wow.
a soldier would go into camp, he would get 4 shirts made of rough linen, 1 uniform, 1 pair of shoes, boots, but they were single lash shoes, so that you could switch them from left to right, so they wear out evenly. There's no left or right shoe. It's just a square-toed shoe.
Wow.
So you got one set of boots, 2 sets of socks, 4 shirts, 1 uniform, 1 size fits all. And that includes the boots, so you either stuff the toes or you add cramped toes, and so on. So it was in the obviously, once you got outfitted and you felt how bad it was, or how tight it was, or how baggy it was, you would try and make as many alterations as you could yourself to make it fit better. The officer always had to look better than his soldiers.
Oh.
So they were not issued a uniform, they were issued a design. The colonel of each regiment would decide what his troop or what his uniform should look like, and they would issue you a written and diagram and say, you go to your tailor and have it done. So there are variations. There's not as much uniformity in the uniform, really, because it's what you could pay for, right? If you could cheat a little bit in the cloth or skip on some lining or whatever, that's what you did to make the, and so on. But you had a uniform allotment, and you went and if you could afford it, you paid more to get a fancier, cleaner, nicer uniform made for you, more tailored look. And that's what you'd have, because and you tried to wear it as little as possible. Some of the colonels were really cheap, so they would buy used uniforms and so on. So the militia, the part-time soldiers would get uniforms that were handed down or cast off from regular units, and things like that. It was just a question of frugality and mass production. The government, as always, doesn't appreciate the soldier, so they're going to, what is the minimum standard we can get away with in terms of issuing kit?
Even back then?
Oh, easily. As early as the first model army under King Charles after Cromwell's, they talk about the new revolutionary army where everybody wore red. That's when it first came in, and that was simply taking a civilian pattern coat and giving it to all the soldiers. Some local town got a contract, and all the ladies were sewing uniforms by the thousands, and red dye was the cheapest, so they all got red. up until that time, soldiers wore whatever was civilian dress appropriate for the period, and we would run around in that. But you just adorn things. Regiments today even have certain things. The Lord Scots Regiment in Brampton has what's called a primrose hackle. It's a small version of that white one made of yellow turkey feathers. And I remember traveling with them in the U.S. and the kids in the schools were asking the Canadian soldiers, "Why do you wear a Tweety bird on your hat?" and it was in memory of the Fusilier Regiment, which was its parent regiment before, and so on. So as a piece of each of the thing, it's all built into the history. The rocket troop came into being during the War of 1812, and you know, the rockets, red glare, bombs bursting in air, that from the American National Anthem, that was me. And there were only 300 soldiers in that regiment. 150 fought with Wellington in Europe, and 150 were sent to North America to beat up the Americans. And so their uniform is a variation on the horse or the regular British artillery, horse artillery. There was foot artillery and horse artillery. So the rocket troop of the Royal Horse Artillery, this is their variant uniform. And the distinction was that since the king thought that the rockets were too experimental and he wouldn't endorse them, the Prince Regent took them on as his personal patronage. So the regiment wore the George Prince Regent cipher and the Prince of Wales 3 feathers as their emblem rather than the King George emblem that all the other soldiers wore. So just sometimes it pays to know somebody.
So how much money did you earn?
The soldier, in Maitland's time, right up until almost World War I, the soldier earned equivalent of $1.25 to $1.50 a day.
That is equivalent to
Yeah.
how much money?
Yeah, well,
today?
today the soldier is making far much. A basic soldier today gets $148 a day. But back then it was $1.25. But I mean, that was your gross pay. You were deducted, there were deductions, stoppages for gin, your beer allowance, and so on. But your food was supplied, right? You got a loaf of bread a week, and a pound of beef or pork, salted or dried a week, a beer ration, a beer ration. You were allowed. It's usually here in North America it was spruce beer. I think we still get it. It's spruce beer. It's made from, and it's 12.5% alcohol. So the soldiers liked it. But it's high in vitamin C, so it was medically prescribed because it replaced the citrus fruits to prevent scurvy. But the soldier would eat. They were hunting parties, so they would forage and kill whatever wild animals they could find. And of course, the native population here taught the soldiers how to diversify their food groups into the insect world. This is the right time now to be drilling for the maggots in the trees because they're dormant. So if you go birch trees, and you can see little holes, you reach in and pull out maggots about this long. And if you hold it by the head and bite off the body, it's high in nutrients, tastes like marshmallow, and so that's good eating. Ants, mold, and honey, of course, fried grasshopper. All those, we don't eat as much diverse foods as they used to, like turtle and snake and all of that kind of stuff. Beaver tails, not the fried dough with sugar, but real beaver tails. You know, things like that. So much more variety of food than you have here. Chocolate and sugar was extremely rare, so that wouldn't have been available. And only beet sugar. No cane sugar here, not until 1840s, 50s more, when the island economy started to be able to export cane sugar beyond just going to England, but beet sugar.